And welcome again to Sunday Night. I'm Mike Goucher, and our guest tonight is Rebecca Ryan, who is the head of Next Generation Consulting. Thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Mike, thanks for inviting me.
I wanted to talk about your Hot Jobs, Cool Communities report first tonight. Milwaukee, number 10 on your Cool Communities list. I got to ask you, what was the reaction of Milwaukee to the fact that it made your list?
I think for young talent, they were throwing their hands up in the air saying, yay, somebody finally figured out that this was a pretty well-kept secret. And then I think for sort of the more established community in Milwaukee, they thought, we're cool?
We're not cool.
Yeah, we're cool. And the rest of the country hasn't said anything. Sometimes one of the things I get from reporters around the country is, well, you live near Milwaukee,
right, so
that's why it made the list. But Nashville was another sort of surprise on the list, and we don't live anywhere near Nashville, and so in any event.
Why do you tell them Milwaukee's a cool place?
Yeah, well, what we did was we discovered a trend about 2 years ago, and that trend was that young people under the age of 28 were first picking a place to live and then finding a job, and we thought, well, this is a little different than the way it's happened in the past. So then we started asking young talent, what makes a community cool? And they came up with hundreds of ideas. I think we had 242 factors that they said, look at these factors. I mean, they were all over the board, as you can imagine. And we finally narrowed it down to 43. And so what we did is we measured the top 224 metros over 100,000 people, according to these indexes, and Milwaukee shook out at 10.
So it is a scientific
Yes.
methodology being used to come up with this ranking.
Yeah.
It's not the hometown, favoritism that some people say, oh, well, you live,
Well, if it was a hometown favorite, I would have put Milwaukee a little higher than 10. Come on.
10 with a bullet, though. Right?
Exactly. That's right.
So tell me, I know 242 is a lot to go through, but let's go through the major things that jump out at you. What do young, talented people want in a city?
Well, to answer this question, let me draw a dichotomy between the way we typically talk about what makes communities livable and the way young talent talk about what makes communities livable. For example, in Wisconsin, there's always a lot of discussion about our tax rate is so high. And when we looked at what makes a community cool for young talent, tax rates never even enter into the equation. In fact, some of the highest taxed communities and states put a lot of that money into parks, trails, and recreation areas, for example, and that's one of the things that jumped out at us, that young talent said, we want to live in communities where we can walk to work, or we want to live in communities where we can bike ride and rollerblade and mountain climb and all those kinds of things.
They want to be participants. It's very different than generations preceding them. They want to be a part of the action.
A part of the action, and because the nature of work has changed. You know, my dad worked for 33 years in a row at the West Bend Company in Washington County. And when he came home at night, he wanted to put his feet up because he'd been on his feet all day. For young talent today, knowledge workers, they're just keying in front of the computer most of the day. They want to put the rollerblades on or get on the mountain bike after work.
How about spectator sports or the arts, things like that? Those are important, right?
Yeah, because they offer all of these options to talent, and talent are used to having a lot of options.
Let me talk about what works against a city in terms of young, talented people. Why don't they want to live somewhere?
That's a great question.
Is it attitude?
Some of it is. Some of it is measurable, like we measured in the report. But then there's a whole part of communities that is just about the vibe, And how do you measure the vibe? It's hard to say. But one of the things that young talent will say is they will leave a community where they don't see people out and about. So if there aren't sort of the stroll districts where people are shopping or eating outdoors, you'll notice a lot of the sort of dormant communities that people tend to leave, young talent tend to leave, are those communities where there aren't opportunities to be outside at jazz festivals and things like that.
How crucial is it to maintain or retain, I guess I should say, young talent for a city to be successful? Is it absolutely crucial?
Oh, it's every community, even the big communities in this country are talking about brain drain. It is critical. And from an economic development standpoint, I mean, think about the great employers we have in Milwaukee. Young talent today aren't going to be working 30 years in a row at one organization for the gold watch in the corner office, but they may stay in a community and work for 4 or 5 different employers during their career. That is critical to Milwaukee as a community and to the employer base within it.
It's your tax base.
Exactly.
You have people leaving, all of a sudden, You got big problems.
Yeah, you need to talk to Governor Doyle. That's the whole deal, Ben.
He's got some big challenges. I'm not sure I'm on the top of his list right now.
Is there anybody in Wisconsin who says, I wish I had that guy's job right now?
No, I don't think so. They're not lining up for that job at this particular moment in time. You raised an interesting thing. The younger folks don't view work the same way even people of my generation, the boomers, view it. You know, it's not all about work. It's about life outside of work.
Exactly.
Talk about the differences between even the boomers and the Gen Xers and then what they call the millennials.
Right. Well, for the boomers, it was not uncommon. You know, the boomers were raised by the traditionalists, the people that were written about in The Greatest Generation. And for my dad and my parents are 76. And for that generation, you had to meet your basic needs. So if you had a job that was providing you with, you know, enough money to do food, clothing, shelter, perfect. And the boomers were raised by that generation, so they were taught, be loyal. And it was during that generation that employer contract was broken, because in the early 80s, when some of our biggest companies started laying people off right and left, the employer contract was broken, and we realized, hey, man, there is no loyalty, and my corporation isn't loyal to me. And so then employees started to push back on that. So Generation X is the first generation that was raised in an environment where there was no corporate loyalty. So they rely on themselves for job security. And back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we said that Xers changed jobs every 18 to 36 months.
That's unheard of in our society.
It absolutely is unheard of, and that's why you started to see companies react by doing things like, you know, putting foosball tables in their break rooms and cappuccino machines and anything to keep them even 4 or 5 months longer. Mm-hmm. And now for the millennial generation, and these are folks born after 1982, they're sometimes called Generation Y, but they want to be called millennials. For this generation, they've got really high expectations because all of their images as they were going through high school, middle school, were about the people who became millionaires overnight. So
the 90s are what they know.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we are going to have a big job as corporate folks to help manage the expectations of the new folks coming in.
So unrealistic expectations in your mind?
It's unrealistic because of the way the market is shaken out, absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to take a break. We're going to continue talking with Rebecca Ryan. She's the head of Next Generation Consulting. We'll be back in just a minute.